Part 1, The Foundation of All Things. Hear now, and listen, for I shall recount to you the words of the chronicle, the book of the upright, which contains the generations of the world from its first day. This is the record of what was, before the mountains were brought forth, before the first whisper of wind stirred over the deep. In the beginning, the supreme God, the everlasting One, called into being the heavens and the earth. But the earth was not as you know it now. It was a vast and desolate waste, a formless void where shadows clung to the deep. There was no order, only a great and terrible emptiness, and a profound darkness covered the face of the abyss. And the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters, a solitary presence in the unformed chaos. Then the voice spoke. It was not a sound that shook the air, but a command that shaped reality itself. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. It was a light not of the sun nor the moon, for they were not yet conceived. It was a pure, undivided radiance, the firstborn of creation, by which the Holy One saw all that was. And God saw the light, that it was good. And he divided the light from the darkness. The light he called day, and the darkness he called night. This was the first day, the first boundary set in the midst of the formless. On the second day, the voice spoke again to the deep. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And it was so. God made the firmament, a great expanse, a dome of crystalline strength, and it divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above it. And the firmament he called heaven. And there was a space, a shelter, between the upper deep and the lower deep. Then, on the third day, God commanded the waters under the heaven to be gathered together into one place, and for the dry land to appear. And the waters receded, pulling back like a curtain to reveal the dust of the earth, the soil, rich and dark. The gathered waters he called seas, and the dry land he called earth. And the earth, at his command, brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind. And the world, once barren, was now clothed in a garment of green, a testament to the life that was to come. On the fourth day, the voice spoke to the heavens. Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And God made two great lights, the greater light, the sun, to rule the day, and the lesser light, the moon, to rule the night. He made the stars also, setting them in their courses, a countless host to illuminate the night and to mark the times appointed. He set them in the firmament to give light upon the earth, and to govern the division between light and darkness that he had first ordained. Then God spoke to the waters and the skies on the fifth day. Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And it was so. The seas swarmed with great sea monsters, the Leviathan and its kind, and with every living creature that moves, each according to its kind. And the skies were filled with the beat of wings, with every winged fowl after its kind. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. On the sixth day, the earth itself received the command. Let the earth bring forth the living creature after its kind, cattle, and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after its kind. And it was so. The earth yielded them up, the cattle lowing in the fields, the beasts of the forest, and everything that creeps upon the ground. The world was now full of sound and movement, a kingdom teeming with life, each creature in its place, under the heavens. But one thing was yet missing. A ruler. A steward. A being in the image of the Creator himself. And the Lord God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He did not speak him into being from nothing, as with the light, nor command the earth to bring him forth, as with the beasts. No, the Creator himself knelt to the soil, to the clay of the new-formed world, and with his own hands, he shaped the vessel. He formed the body, system within system, bone and sinew, a complex and beautiful form from the simple dust of the ground. And into its nostrils, he breathed the breath of life. It was not the wind, nor the spirit that moved over the waters. It was the very breath of God, a spark of the divine, the neshama. And man became a living soul. The first man opened his eyes. He saw the light of the sixth day, he saw the face of his Creator, and he knew. He was placed in a garden that God had planted eastward in Eden, a place of surpassing beauty, where every tree that was pleasant to the sight and good for food grew, and where 4 sacred rivers flowed to water the earth. In the midst of the garden stood the tree of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God brought every beast of the field and every fowl of the air to the man, to see what he would call them. And whatsoever the man called every living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. He saw their natures, their essences, and in naming them, he established his authority over them, his understanding. But for Adam, there was not found a helper, a counterpart, suitable for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh in its place. And the rib, which the Lord God had taken from the man, he built into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his woman, and they were not ashamed. For in the garden, in the presence of God, there was no knowledge of lack, no knowledge of evil, only the perfect harmony of creation, the rhythm of the sixth day, as the first man and the first woman stood together, the crown of all that had been made. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day, and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. This was the foundation. This was the world as it was intended, a perfect work from the hand of the perfect one. But harmony, once established, is a delicate thing. And in the stillness of the garden, a subtle presence already waited, watching the two who were one flesh, and considering the single command they had been given. Part 2, the command, the serpent, and the fall. And so the man, whose name was Adam, and the woman, whose name was Chava, for she was the mother of all life, dwelt in the Garden of Eden. They walked in the cool of the day, and they knew the sound of the footsteps of the Lord God. They lacked for nothing. The earth yielded its fruit to them without toil, and the beasts of the field regarded them with reverence, for they carried the image of the Creator. They were given dominion over all, to tend the garden and to keep it. But a law was set in the midst of their paradise, a single boundary to test their love, to affirm their will. For the Lord God had commanded the man, saying, "Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." The words were clear. The consequence was absolute. Death was a concept unknown to them, a shadow that had no place in the perpetual light of their world. It was a mystery, a word without form, and their obedience was to be a pure gift, a choice made from love and trust, not from fear. Now, the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. He was a creature of great beauty and cunning, and in his heart, a seed of rebellion had taken root. He saw the man and the woman in their innocence, and he envied their station. He desired to see the perfect work marred, the divine image tarnished. So he came to the woman, not with a roar, but with a whisper, a question that masqueraded as curiosity. "Indeed," he said, his voice like a rustle of leaves. "Has God said, 'You shall not eat of every tree of the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, 'You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" See how the command was already shifting in her mind. She added to it, "Neither shall you touch it," a fence around the law, a sign that the prohibition had begun to feel like a confinement. The purity of the single rule was now clouded by her own interpretation. Then the serpent spoke the lie that would unravel the world. "You shall not surely die," he said. "For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." The words were a poison, sweet and deadly. They painted the Creator not as a loving Father, but as a jealous power, withholding a great secret from them. They planted the idea that to disobey was not to fall, but to rise, to become like God Himself. The woman looked at the tree with new eyes. She saw that it was a tree to be desired, a thing that could make one wise. The desire for a wisdom separate from God, a knowledge gained by one's own hand, took hold of her heart. She reached out her hand. She took of its fruit. And she ate. The taste was not of poison, but of revelation. A shock ran through her, a tearing of the veil. Her eyes were opened, just as the serpent had promised, but not to the glory of Godhood. They were open to their own nakedness. For the first time, they knew lack. They knew shame. The divine light that had clothed them seemed to recede, and they saw only their frail, exposed flesh. She gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. The silence that followed was heavier than any before. The very air of the garden seemed to grow cold. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden, and a terror, a new and awful thing, seized them. They hid themselves amongst the trees of the garden, their hearts pounding a rhythm of fear where once there had been only peace. And the voice of the Lord God called out to the man, "ha-Yashar? Where are you?" It was not a question of location, but of state. It was the cry of a father for a lost child. "Where have you gone? What has become of you?" And the man, his voice trembling, said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree, which I commanded you that you should not eat?" Then the man, in his newfound knowledge of blame, did not confess. He accused. "The woman whom you gave to be with me," he said, "she gave me of the tree, and I did eat." The gift of God, the Helper, became in his mouth the cause of his ruin. And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat." Then the Lord God turned to the serpent, and his judgment was swift and terrible. "Because you have done this, you are cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, it shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." To the woman, he said, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In sorrow you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be to your husband, and he shall rule over you." The union that was once one flesh was now fractured by struggle and dominion. And to Adam, he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns also and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." The sentence was pronounced. Death had entered the world, not as a sudden end, but as a long, slow decay. The earth itself, once a willing partner, now became an adversary, resisting his labor. Work became toil. Life became a march back to the dust. And the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins, and clothed them. It was an act of mercy, covering their shame, but it was a covering born of a death, the first death in creation, a sacrifice to shelter them from their own nakedness. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever in this fallen state," he did not finish the thought. The mercy was too terrible. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to guard the way to the tree of life. And the great gates closed behind them. The light of the garden faded from their view. They stood outside, in the wide world, under a sun that now felt harsh, on an earth that felt hard. They were alone, clothed in skins, carrying within them the memory of a lost home, and the heavy knowledge of what they had done. The long exile had begun. Part 3: The First Toil and the First Birth. And so Adam and his woman, Chava, found themselves in the world beyond the wall of Eden. The ground beneath their feet was no longer the soft, yielding soil of the garden, but a hard and stubborn earth. The air did not carry the same fragrance of perpetual bloom, and the sun's warmth could turn to a scorching heat, the night's coolness to a biting chill. They were exiles in a kingdom they were meant to rule, and the weight of the curse settled upon their shoulders. Adam took up the task for which he was destined, yet now it was a punishment. He took a sharpened stone and began to till the earth. But where his touch in the garden had been one of gentle tending, here it was a struggle. The earth fought back. Thorns and thistles, plants of no use and of much pain, sprang up where he sought to plant good seed. The sweat that had never known his brow in Eden now poured forth in streams, stinging his eyes and salting the soil. He labored from the rising of the sun until its setting, and his bread was bought with the aching of his bones and the weariness of his spirit. This was the meaning of the word death, a slow return to the dust, begun not in the grave, but in the field. Chava, too, felt the change within her own body. The harmony of their union was now touched by a new dynamic, a desire that was intertwined with a need for dominion. And she knew a sorrow that was reserved for her alone. The promise of life within her, once a pure joy, was now shadowed by the knowledge of pain. The bringing forth of a new soul would be a passage of anguish, a tearing of the very fabric of her being, as the earth was torn by her husband's tool. In time, Adam knew his wife, and Chava conceived. The months passed, and the weight of the child grew within her, a living reminder of both their transgression and God's enduring command to be fruitful. The pains came upon her as had been foretold, great and rending pains, and she cried out in the agony of her labor. But from the pain, life emerged. She held the child, a son, and a fierce, painful love filled her heart. She looked upon his face, and she remembered the words of the Lord to the serpent. "It shall bruise your head." In this new life, she saw a flicker of that promised hope. And she said, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." Some sages say she spoke these words with prophetic insight, believing this child, her firstborn, to be the promised seed who would crush the enemy. And she called his name Cain, which is to say, acquisition, for she said, "I have acquired a man from the Lord." The boy grew. And after days, Chava conceived again and bore a second son. Him she called Hevel, which is to say, breath, or vapor. For she saw that life was fleeting, a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. His name was a whisper of the mortality they had brought into the world, a soft sigh against the sturdy, hopeful name of his brother. And the two boys grew into men, and their natures were as different as their names. Cain, the firstborn, followed the way of the earth, the way of the curse. He became a tiller of the ground, like his father. His hands were calloused, his back was strong. He worked the stubborn soil, and he saw the direct fruit of his labor, the grain, the vegetables, the sustenance of their lives. His spirit was serious, heavy, and possessive. The earth was his domain, and he ruled it with sweat and strength. Hevel, the younger, became a keeper of sheep. He walked the open fields, not fighting the earth to make it yield, but guiding the flocks to where the grass was green and the water was still. His life was with the living, breathing creatures. He knew their ways, their vulnerabilities. His work was not one of domination, but of guardianship. His spirit was gentler, more reflective, his eyes often turned not to the ground at his feet, but to the heavens above. Thus were the two paths of man laid bare outside the garden, the path of the farmer, wresting sustenance from a cursed world, and the path of the shepherd, tending the living possessions granted by God. And in the hearts of these two brothers, the first children of exile, the great struggle between offering and pride, between righteousness and jealousy, was soon to be awakened. For it came to pass, after the turning of many seasons, that the brothers determined to bring an offering to the Lord. It was an impulse born of a memory, a dimly recalled truth that the one who had cast them out was still their Creator, still the source of all life. They sought to bridge the chasm, to appease the wrath they felt in the thorns and the labor pains. Cain brought of the fruit of the ground, an offering from his toil. Hevel also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of their fat. He chose the best, the most valuable, the unblemished firstborn of his sheep. And the Lord had respect unto Hevel and to his offering. A fire, it is said, descended from heaven and consumed the lamb and its fat, a sign of divine acceptance, a scent pleasing to the Lord. But unto Cain and to his offering, he had not respect. The fruit of the ground, the product of the cursed earth, offered without the covering of a life given, lay upon the altar untouched. No fire fell. Only silence. And Cain's countenance fell. His face, once set with determination, became a mask of fury and deep hurt. The rejection of his gift felt like a rejection of his very self, of all his striving and his strength. The hope his mother had placed in him curdled into a bitter poison in his soul. The silence from heaven was louder to him than any thunder. Part 4, The Mark upon the Earth. The silence that followed the offerings was a living thing, a weight that pressed down upon the fields. Cain stood before his untouched altar, the fruits of his labor lying inert, a testament to his rejection. He felt the eyes of his brother, though Hevel did not speak. He felt the eyes of his parents, watching from a distance. And he felt, most of all, the gaze of the one who had turned away. A fire kindled in his heart, a rage that was hotter than the heavenly fire that had consumed his brother's lamb. His face, once a mirror of his father's earnest toil, became dark and twisted. His hands, made for tilling, clenched into fists. Then the voice came again, not in the cool of the day, but in the heat of his fury. The Lord spoke to Cain, and his words were a warning, a final barrier before the abyss. "Why are you angry?" the voice asked. "And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, shall you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin crouches at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." The words were clear, a map away from the darkness. You must rule over it. The choice was his, as it had been his father's. The crouching beast of sin was not yet upon him, it waited at the threshold of his will. To do well was to offer rightly, from a heart of trust, not of bargaining. To master the sin was to turn from its desire, to refuse its pull. But Cain heard only judgment in the words, not mercy. He heard an accusation he could not bear. The beast at the door was now a companion in his soul. He turned the warning over in his mind until it became a justification. It was Hevel who had made him look bad. It was God who was unfair. The resentment, instead of being mastered him. He spoke to his brother, Hevel. His words are lost to the chronicle, but their tone is not. Perhaps he suggested they go out into the field, away from the eyes of their parents. Perhaps he feigned reconciliation, a desire to speak of what had happened. Hevel, whose heart knew no guile, went with him. They stood together in the open field, the tiller of the ground and the keeper of the sheep. The earth beneath them, still cursed from their father's transgression, was about to drink a new kind of poison. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against his brother. The crouching sin sprang. With a violence the world had never known, he struck Hevel. He felled him to the ground. And there, on the open earth, amidst the very fruit of his rejected toil, Cain slew his brother. He spilled his brother's blood upon the soil. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of rejection, but the silence of a world violated. The first life given was now the first life taken. The breath of God, breathed into Adam, was now extinguished by Adam's own son. Then the voice of the Lord came to Cain, a sound that now carried a terrible weight of grief. "Where is Hevel, your brother?" And Cain, the lie forming as easily as the blow had fallen, answered with a defiance that echoed his father's blame. "I do not know," he said. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The earth itself seemed to recoil at the words. And the Lord said, "What have you done?" "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. It shrieks from the very soil upon which you stand." The curse, once laid upon the earth for Adam's sake, was now deepened for Cain's. And now, the voice continued, "You are cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto you her strength. A fugitive and a wanderer shall you be in the earth." The judgment was pronounced. The earth that had been his domain, his identity, would now actively reject him. It would not yield to him. He would be rootless, a man without a place, severed from the very source of life he had sought to control. Then Cain, the full terror of his isolation finally breaking through his pride, spoke to the Lord. "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from your face shall I be hidden, and I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth, and it shall come to pass, that anyone who finds me will slay me." His fear was not of God, but of man. He saw in every face a reflection of his own murderous heart, and he knew he would be its victim. And the Lord, in a mercy that must have been more painful than any wrath, set a mark upon Cain. A sign. A warning. The chronicle does not name its form, whether it was upon his brow or in his eyes. But its purpose was clear, to ensure that no one finding him would kill him. It was a mark of divine protection for the divine outcast, a guarantee that his punishment, a long life of wandering and alienation, would be carried out in full. So Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. He did not merely leave his family's encampment, he departed from the very concept of home. He dwelt in the land of Nod, which means wandering, on the east of Eden. He became a builder of a city, a permanent structure for a permanent fugitive, naming it after his son, Enoch, a desperate attempt to forge a legacy from a line that was cursed. And back in the land of his birth, Adam and Chava were left with an emptiness more profound than their exile from Eden. The garden was lost, but that was a sorrow of place. Now, a son was dead, and a son was cursed. The first family was broken by the very violence that had entered the world through their transgression. They had eaten of the knowledge of good and evil, and now they knew its fruit in its fullest, most bitter harvest. The blood of the righteous cried out from the ground, and the silence that answered was filled with a grief that had no name. Part 5: The Seed of Seth and the City of Man. The field where Hevel fell lay fallow, a place of terrible silence. No flock grazed there. No plow broke its soil. It was a monument to the first death, and the air above it was heavy with a question that had no answer. Adam and Chava bore a grief that was twofold, for the son who was slain, and for the son who was lost, a wanderer under the shadow of a mark that was both curse and protection. The world outside Eden had proven to be more terrible than they could have imagined. The knowledge of evil was no longer an abstract concept, it was the memory of a son's rage and a son's blood soaking into the earth. Generations passed in the land of Nod. Cain, the fugitive, knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And Cain, the wanderer, built a city. In his defiance, or perhaps in his profound understanding of his own rootlessness, he sought to create a permanent place. He called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. It was the first city of man, founded not on the presence of God, but on the consequence of murder. And the line of Cain grew, and they became builders, craftsmen, and makers of tents and instruments of music and of bronze and iron. They were the shapers of the earth, forging a civilization from the stuff of their exile, their names echoing with the clamor of human achievement: Irad, Mehujael, Methushel, Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives, a breaking of the first pattern, and his children were the founders of herds and of music and of craftsmanship. But violence, the inheritance of their father Cain, was woven into their line. Lamech boasted to his wives, Adah and Zillah, "Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, listen to my speech, for I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. The curse had multiplied. The guarded killer gave way to the boastful one, who saw his own vengeance as a thing greater than the law of God. But in the tents of Adam and Chava, a different story was being written. It was a story of sorrow, and of a hope that refused to be extinguished. For Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son. And in the shadow of Hevel's death and Cain's exile, this new life was a balm. Chava looked upon the child, and she saw in him not the promised crusher of the serpent, for that hope had been shattered by Cain's betrayal, but a replacement for the righteous son who was lost. For God, she said, has appointed me another seed instead of Hevel, because Cain slew him. And she called his name Shet, which means appointed, or foundation. And the spirit of this child was different. He did not seek to build a city or to forge tools of bronze. He walked in the paths of his lost brother, Hevel, a keeper of flocks, a quiet man who looked to the heavens. He was a foundation, a new beginning. From his line, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. They did not merely make offerings, they sought his face. They remembered the stories of the garden, of the voice that walked in the cool of the day, and they turned their hearts from the pride of the city of man toward the memory of a lost communion. And Adam, now an old man, his face lined with the toil of centuries and the grief of a murdered son, saw and shed a flicker of the original light. He instructed his son in the ways of the Lord, in the story of the creation, the command, the fall, and the terrible day when the earth cried out. He taught him of the promise spoken to the serpent, a promise that now seemed to rest upon this new, appointed line. The chronicle tells us that Adam lived 800 years after he begot Shet, and he begot sons and daughters. The earth began to fill, not only with the boastful children of Cain, who built and forged and sang songs of their own strength, but with the children of Shet, who, though they too were fallen and lived in a world of thorns, still remembered to call upon the name of the Lord. Two civilizations grew side by side, one rooted in the pride of human achievement, the other in the hope of divine redemption. One building towers toward the sky, the other raising altars to the God beyond the sky. The blood of Hevel had cried out from the ground for justice, and the answer was not yet a flood, but a seed. A fragile, appointed line, through whom the memory of God would be kept alive in a world growing ever darker, ever louder, ever more enamored with its own power. The foundation was laid, a thread of light in the gathering shadow. Part 6, The Generations of Adam and the Hope of Men. The days of Adam upon the earth were 930 years, and then he died. The words are stark, a final, solemn echo of the sentence pronounced in the garden, "For dust you are, and to dust you shall return." The first man, formed by the hand of God from the clay of the earth, returned to it. The breath of life that had animated him was withdrawn, and the silence that followed was the silence of mortality fulfilled. He had seen the world made, and he had seen it unmade by his own hand. He had tasted the fruit of the one tree and had lived to taste the bitter fruit of his son's blood. He had founded a race and had buried a child. And now, the long toil was over. With him was laid to rest an era. He was the last living soul to have heard the direct sound of the Creator's footsteps, to have known the unshadowed light of the first dawn. His death sealed the gate of Eden more finally than any flaming sword. But the chronicle does not end with his death. For the line of Shet, the appointed seed, endured. The generations are recounted, a roll call of names that stretches across centuries, a chain of life reaching from the first man toward a horizon veiled in mystery. Shet lived, and he begot Enosh. And in the days of Enosh, a pivotal thing occurred. The chronicle states, "Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord." It was not a casual remembrance. It was a deliberate turning. As the children of Cain built their city and forged their instruments of power, the children of Shet established a different practice, the public and profane proclamation of the Lord's name. They gathered, they invoked, they sought. They built not a city of stone, but a community of faith, a fragile bulwark against the rising tide of forgetfulness. The generations unfolded, each man begetting a son who would carry the thread. Enosh begot Kenan, Kenan begot Mahalalel, Mahalalel begot Jared, Jared begot Chanach. And of Chanach, the seventh from Adam, a remarkable thing is written. He did not simply live and die. He walked with God. The phrase evokes the lost intimacy of the garden. For 300 years after he begot his son, Methuselah, Chanukh walked in harmony with the divine, a single life aligned with the will of its maker in a world that was increasingly misaligned. And then, he was not, for God took him. He did not suffer the fate of Adam, he was gathered. His earthly journey ended not by the slow decay of the curse, but by the direct hand of the one with whom he walked. His life was a sign, a testament that the chasm of Eden was not entirely unbridgeable, that relationship with the Creator was still possible, even for a son of fallen Adam. Methuselah begot Lamech, and Lamech, a man living in the shadow of a coming storm he could not yet see, begot a son. He looked upon the child, and in his heart was a hope that transcended the weary land. He named him Noach, which means rest or comfort. And Lamech spoke a prophecy over his infant son, saying, "This one shall comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." The words hung in the air, a promise of reprieve. The back-breaking labor, the thorn-infested earth, the long, slow return to dust, this boy, Noach, would bring an end to it. It was a hope for redemption, for a lifting of the ancient curse. But the nature of that comfort was yet hidden. It would not come through gentle reform or a sudden divine pardon. It would be born of a great and terrible judgment, a washing of the world that would be both an end and a beginning. And so the chronicle of the first age draws to a close. The line of the appointed seed, from Shet to Noach, stands as a slender thread of light. They are men who call upon the name of the Lord, men who, in rare instances, walk with God. But around them, the world grows loud. The children of Cain multiply, and their influence spreads. The two lines, the righteous and the wicked, begin to intertwine and blur. The sons of God see the daughters of men, that they are fair. The distinct threads are woven together, and the fabric of humanity becomes corrupt. The hope now rests upon one man, a man named Rest, who would find grace in the eyes of the Lord. The generations before the flood are complete. The stage is set. The earth is filled with violence, and the footsteps of the judge are heard approaching, slow, heavy, and inexorable. The comfort would come, but first, the flood. And so the first chronicles were written, and the foundation was laid for all that was to come. The stories of the first generations, their choices and their consequences, echo into our own time. If this journey into the deep past has resonated with you, if you felt the weight of these ancient words, then you are a part of keeping this story alive. Subscribe to this channel. By joining us, you ensure that these lost chronicles continue to be heard. Your subscription is a voice in the darkness, saying, "Tell me more." Let us know what you have witnessed here. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Which moment held the most power for you? The forming of Adam from the dust? The silence after Cain's offering? The hope placed in the line of Seth? Your reflections add to the life of this text. And if you wish to see these narratives continue, the generations before the flood, the stories of the giants, the great deluge itself, then give this video a like. It is the sign that the audience desires to walk further down this path. The chronicle is vast. The story is not over. We await your voice.